Kutavach Shavua Tov. Welcome, folks. As we continue and perhaps even conclude today, the Mimer Basi Lagani. Basi Lagani means I've come to my garden. Well, God came to the garden originally, the Garden of Eden. What is unique about a garden versus a field? What does it mean that Adam and Eve got punished because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and therefore they're kicked out of the garden? What does that mean? What does it mean that they were embarrassed the first thing after they had sinned? What was the embarrassment? They were naked before. Why all of a sudden are they now embarrassed? They were embarrassed the first thing. Why is it that God creates food that is, its purpose is nourishment, but the first thing that we have is pleasure from it? Its purpose is nourishment, that you should, survive. You should be able to have enough energy to come and learn right now. So why would the first thing, though, that we experience with food, it's with our eyes, we eat with our eyes, see how it looks, and then the taste on the palate. Everything, and others. Of course, God can do anything that he wants, and that's the point. Why is it that we first have pleasure from it? And if we're talking about pleasure, have food, the other pleasure that is, if you will, the ultimate pleasure is sexuality between man and woman. According to Torah, man and woman, meaning wife, husband and wife. Why is that the ultimate pleasure? Okay. We will begin to answer some of these things, and this is all based on the Maimer and the Chassidic discourse that we're learning. Basi Lagani comes to the garden. Coming to a garden is not about essentials in life. A field is a place where you plant things like wheat to grow for essentials of life. You need, bread is an essential of life that gives life. A garden is more about the pleasure. A beautiful garden, whether it's an orchard of beautiful trees, or whether it's a beautiful plants of flowers or whatnot. But a garden is about its beauty that has pleasure. And why is that? Why is God coming to the garden? Well, before Chassidus, which we learn every day, right? We're learning Chassidus. The way people looked at God was that God, he's infinite. He's beyond. He needs nothing. He needs nothing. So therefore, why does he have a world? For our sake. Because he's kind, benevolent, and he's giving. So he wants to give to us. So it's really all about us. So the way they would understand King Solomon's words, God came to the garden for our sake. He doesn't need the garden. He doesn't need anything. Does he need our mitzvah? He doesn't need it. Chassidus came and said, no. God wants a relationship. Where do we know that? God desires. And the desire, don't ask a question on it, the Alter Rebbe says, it's beyond. Why does he want? He wants a relationship with us in this world. Not in the next world. Not that he doesn't have a relationship there, but that's where he wants the relationship. He wants a relationship here in this world. Why does he want the relationship? Because in us he has pleasure. And that's what it means to come into the garden, as opposed to a field. A field is not about pleasure. A field is about sustaining, surviving, with the things that are necessary to survive with, which wheat is the staff of life. Even today you say, maybe you can't eat bread anymore. Let's be traditional here, right? Wheat is the staff of life, and it's necessary. A garden isn't necessary. It's because you want the pleasure. God has a pleasure in us, in the mitzvahs that we do, in creating a dwelling place in this low world. God has a pleasure in that. God is infinite. How can I have a pleasure? Nope. So you have a question. All right. So it is. So it is. And therefore, it's the relationship that he wants. In that relationship, he has a pleasure in me. Why does he have a pleasure in me? Because it's me. Does he have a pleasure in what I do? Yes. That's true. And that's all, everybody understands that. But it's deeper than that. He has a pleasure in me because I have a piece of God in me. And therefore, the pleasure is not because of what I accomplished, but I'm whole, I'm complete, I'm worthy. Not because I've done something, because I am something. I've got a piece of God in me. And in that, God takes pleasure. Period. So when I'm aware of that, and I live with that becomes my pleasure, that God has a pleasure in me, and therefore I connect to that. In other words, I'm God aware, not self-aware of me being separate from God in any manner, but I'm God aware. Then sexuality becomes holy of holies. Then sexuality becomes holy of holies. If I'm self-aware, then my nakedness becomes an embarrassment. We are now self-aware, so therefore, that's what happened with Adam and Eve when they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Before that, they were just God-aware. And the only reason they were that way is because that's what God created the garden. To have pleasure in the divine. And that's all they had, was the pleasure in the divine. They were so aligned with the divine that there was nothing else. But Chava wanted more. And therefore, Adam wanted more. What was the more? Oh, I want to be self-aware. Now, as you became self-aware, oh, what does it mean self-aware? Self-aware by definition means I am. But in a world that God creates and there's only but God, that I am means there's a separateness, there's a disconnect. And because of that disconnect, there's shame. So shame only comes from a sense of disconnect from the divine. And we're not looking for the pleasure in the divine. We're looking at self-pleasure. What makes pleasure for me from my animal instinct, my animal soul. And then is a disconnect from the divine. Whereas sexuality is the Holy of Holies. How's it the Holy of Holies? Because through sexuality, we have the power of God. Because it's only through sexuality that you can create a child. That's the power of the Ein Sof. And that child creates another child, another child, ad infinitum. So it's got that power of God that's vested in us, that we create ad infinitum, generation after generation, a piece of God in the child that comes through us. But that's when we understand that it is a holy engagement, a Holy of Holies for that matter. But when we're misaligned and we make it about our pleasure rather than appreciating that it's a divine pleasure, and we make it about us, well, that's why sexuality today is so disruptive, corruptive, abused, that has created so much trauma because of being not aligned with the divine. And therefore it creates great shame. But that's not what God wanted. God wants us, through our efforts, to come now and create a world of good, a world of divine that's aligned with the divine, and that we have great pleasure in that world. But what's the pleasure? So the pleasure isn't in the beautiful, merely the beautiful sight of the apple, the taste of the apple on the palate, but it's the blessing that you make and realize that through this, I have a divine connection. Through the apple that I make a blessing on it, I'm aligned with the divine. And in that I have pleasure to be aligned. And this, then we can understand why food, we have pleasure from it before we digest it and use it for its purpose. Because the ultimate purpose is pleasure. But not pleasure of the five senses, but divine pleasure. That we're aligned with God, with merely in the eating of an apple, food that we eat, in the sexuality that one engages in, that it is an expression of the divine. So therefore we have pleasure in the food immediately, because, well, that's where the challenge lies. Do I just leave it there with the personal, self-directed animal soul's desire, the body's desire for its pleasure? Or do I recognize, yes, that there, but that's not what I'm focused on. Or that's not what I'm aware that there's a divine pleasure here. Using this not only for the divine, but having a pleasure in being aligned with the divine, with God. So pleasure is usually transactional. Because of the pleasure that I want to have, so therefore I have a relationship with you. Because of the pleasure, because, you do things for me, they give me pleasure. That's the problem when it becomes transactional. But here we're talking about a pleasure in you because of the divine, not because of what I gain from you, not what I have from you, or the fears that I have that you might trigger something in me, right? So I have the fear of that, the triggers that there may be, and therefore avoid the relationship. Or I want the relationship because of transactional benefit that I have. So I have pleasure in you because of what I gain from you. That's not what we're talking about. That's not divine. Divine is that as God has a relationship with us because he has a pleasure in us because it's us, likewise, we have a pleasure in another, not because of what they do for us, because it's them. It's my spouse. It's my child. It's my fellow Jew. How do you have that? Because you have an inherent relationship with them, so you're capable of having that. But that's a lot of hard work to get there. That's not a simple thing that I just described. That is a lot of hard work to recognize that I have the animal soul in me that wants what it wants for itself. Right? It wants the pleasure for oneself. And the divine soul in me that wants the pleasure just through the connection. How do we do that with God? When we do the mitzvah, we have the connection. Right? In the act of doing the mitzvah, we have the connection. Period. There was a lot there. And digest it. It's very powerful, very meaningful, and a lot to live with. All right. Thank you for joining. I'm going to try to do Chumash Rashi as soon as possible.